All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships. Let me get that word out. Podcast. And today I've got Mick Smith with me. Mick, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show today.
Well, good to see you again, my friend.
Yes. I'll tell you, I want to start off by giving a shout out to Marcus Newcomb because he
Yeah,
was the one that introduced you and I. And without him, we probably would have never met, Mick.
that's
And
true.
uh, and what a beautiful way to get connected with somebody, which is through somebody that you and I both already have a relationship with. And I mean, and of course, that's what this podcast is all about, is about valuable relationships. And so what I'd like to I just want to start off by, I want to go back a little bit with you and stuff and kind of, to before you became an entrepreneur and just kind of start digging in with like how, what was your first experience with even knowing that you were going to be an entrepreneur? How did you even become an entrepreneur to start with?
Well, Kevin, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. So I'm
I
still in there.
got you.
So I just basically I would say I'm a recovering academic. So I was in academia for a very long time, and I published
Okay.
about 100 papers or so in publications in academia. But I also realized I got to a point, I really don't need all that rigmarole. And in academia, like in a lot of fields, there is a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of things that slow you down. So I said, well, what do I really like? Well, I really like ideas. I'm intellectual in one way or another, and I like working with people. So why not just concentrate on the advising part and the development of ideas, which is into a book? So that's what I really said. That's really what I want to do. That's where my heart is. And
Okay.
I don't really want all the bureaucracy and all the politics and all the other things that come along with academia, like in a lot of fields. I think people that are in corporate can relate to that as well. So that's what really sparked the interest. And I said, let's just concentrate on relationships, ideas, and getting into a tactile form of a book.
Oh, very good. So then you help, is it entrepreneurs? Is it people who aren't entrepreneurs? You help them write their books then, correct?
Yeah, and I think it's really somebody who has been successful in one sort or another, because
Okay.
that's the academic part of me. Because I know there are a lot of people that can edit, and a lot of people just say, let's just write a book. And like, okay, that's fine. I understand that. But what I'm really looking for are who are those people that I would say are the movers and the shakers? Like, who has really been successful in what they do? So it's not confined to any one particular industry, but someone who has been successful. They've got a process or a system in place that I think the rest of the world needs to hear about. And this is kind of my 1960s idealism, which I tell everybody. It's like I still want to make the world a better place because I grew up during a very chaotic time. And I still think that all of us as human beings and individuals need to make the world a little bit better. And so when I see someone who's successful, they've had a business and they've employed people and they have a system and probably a transformative story of their own, which is how they became a entrepreneur in the first place. That's a killer story. And I think the rest of the world needs to know that. I think a lot of times they just don't know how to structure it. And there's where my academic side comes into play.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So what was the first book project that you ended up working on when you started going down this path, Mick?
Well, I'll back it up a little bit because I think
Okay.
it makes sense, because then people start asking me, like, well, what have you written? And I guess that's a good question, because unless I've seen it actually from an author's point of view, I don't know if I could really help other people. So I did the all academic work, which is like, all right, I understand, what a subject and a verb and a direct and indirect object is, but I thought to myself, I actually do have a compelling story and somewhat of a tragedy as well, because it was a traumatic experience in my life. And I said, but that makes a good story. So, hey, why not write a novel? So sure enough, that's what I did. So I wrote the
Okay.
novel Burning America. And then I said, I always saw it as a visual format. So I said, okay, well, why don't I write a screenplay? Because I saw it visually anyway. Then I wrote a screenplay. I've
Wow.
also been music follower for many, many years. I was in radio broadcasting in the 70s, a long time ago, and I've been following a classic singer-songwriter for a long time. So I said, that's another project I'd like to work on. So then I published a book on that individual. So having gone through that, then I said, all right, now I can see it not only as an academic, but how also as an author, a person who has to market their books, a person who has to get on podcasts and get out there and promote. So those really prepared me for helping other people. And that's what I've started to say. I look for good ideas, just like, and if you think of a format, something like if you ever spent any time in grad school, it's something along those lines. I work very intensely and very closely with leaders, visionaries, successful people in a very small format, similar to a graduate format where you have the professor and you work with a very small group of people. So that's how it started.
Wow, that is awesome. So now I'll go back to my question. What was the first book project that you helped somebody else write their book after you got to that spot?
Well, it's kind of interesting, I think, because then people started asking me for things. So I said, all right, I'm starting out. So how about if I just start? And starting meant, okay, I had came across an individual who needed to write a speech for a wedding. His best
Okay.
friends had asked them, there's relationship connection. They wanted him, and he's a minister. So I said, all right, there's a project. That's how I started. From there, then I started looking for, and several people who had those transformative stories, an individual who also experienced a tragedy. And when she came to me after writing my book, the novel, she said, well, maybe I should write a novel too about my story. And I go, yeah, you really should, once I heard her story. So since that time, she's also become a life coach and a 5-time bestseller as well. But I think when you have that compelling story, and you've been able to do something else in the latter part of your life and keep on going and keep on ticking. That's what I think is very successful. So I'm very proud of that particular project, and we remain friends, just like I think anybody I work with. That's the relationship angle. I want to stay friends. I put in a contract, okay, this is going to last 6 months or a year, but off the record, basically, we're going to be friends. So put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So did she use her book to promote her life coaching practice as well then? Was there a tie in there?
I think it kind of intertwined because it was a person that was beginning to have a life change herself. And I think when she said, I have a story that once you've put it together in a novel, I've seen what you can do, and then I will as well. And I think there was when the life change came in for herself because then she became a life coach. And so very successful, like a second career, I suppose you might say it. And so we're still ticking and still running around. So I think there's always life after whatever job you've had and whatever corporate experience you've had, or do something else. As long as you're breathing, keep on doing something.
Yeah. 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 So what is what's what's the thing that inspires you most about the work you do and the impact that you get to make, Mick?
Yeah, it's no question. It's the ideas. So when it comes down to being that recovering academic, I said, what always interested me in academia in the first place? I wanted to learn. I wanted to know things. So I pursued that myself throughout my undergraduate and graduate career, and then as a professor and as an academic administrator. But that's what really gets me interested because there's other people who have a unique contribution to make, so I can appreciate where they're coming from. And if they have a good idea, what I start looking at is, well, is there really a marketing way to do something with this? So I look at a book project as an ROI. It should be increasing their business. It should
Yeah.
increase their ability to speak, charge higher fees, all those things. So if you look at a book project from that angle, as a ROI project, which is what I do, it's the idea. And it's some ideas are not going to go anywhere, and other ideas I can tell I get really excited about them and know, yeah, this is a killer idea. You should be writing a book. And hopefully they're working with me.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Wow. Well, okay. So now that we've got some context set here, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. And I'm going to reiterate the question I want to ask you around relationships for the benefit of our listeners. So, Mick, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons. And I'm just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Yeah, there's no question. So I was young at one time. I know it's hard to believe, but I was 25 and a good buddy of mine was 21 and I had just gone with a breakup of the love of my life and I really, really needed a friend. And this individual came into my life. So Mike came into my life. He's been my best friend for now like 45 years and it
Wow.
changed the entire cast of my life because the tragedy I had mentioned earlier, wrote my novel about, happened many years later. Now, here's the odd thing. About 20 years after my experience, almost the exact same tragedy occurred to him in his life. So I'm saying to myself, now this is really bizarre, right? So here's somebody who is my best friend, and we've been friends for 45 years. 20 years later, he experienced the same thing that I did, which is just how the bond of a relationship makes it very clear. So the book I had written about the classic songwriter, I dedicated to him because he has written songs over his life. He's released some CDs and things like that. So he's a musician and a songwriter himself. So I dedicated the book to him, and that friendship has really changed the course of both our lives. But I always feel like I owe him more than he owes me because I think he's that good of a buddy.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So, what are some of the other experiences that you guys have had together? Because 45 years, that's a long-term friendship right there and stuff. I'm sure you guys have had a lot of experiences together over 45 years.
Yes, they mostly involve women and jobs, which is not surprising, right? So when we first met each other, I had known him sort of casually. We had gone to the same church and I kind of knew who he was. I never really met him. But when we were both young men, we actually started a home, a community home, because we were volunteering and doing a lot of church work. So a bunch of us who were single guys, I said, all right, you know what we should do? Since we're single, let's pool all our resources together, rent a house, and then set it up so we can live together and then continue all the ministry type things that we were doing. And that's when Mike moved in because he was looking for a place, and that's how we really bonded because we were living together and had this house together, and it was all connected to a local church as well too. So those kinds of experiences meant that formation wise in the rest of our lives, throughout our jobs, our families, our relationships, we've continued to be very, very close. And I think that's where it comes down to. So we're good advisors for one another. You know, the Bible talks about that iron sharpens iron, and that defines our friendship. It's not a person who just tells me what I want to hear, but tells me things I don't want to hear, and I do the same for him, which means it has that full range of, yes, we have some things where we don't see eye to eye, but we know it's always expressed in love and care and concern. And that's where you can take it because that's what a real good and true friendship is. So there's been very strange things. My car went out on me. I was almost the middle of the night. I happened to be somewhat close to my buddy, and so what I did, call him up. Hey, my car broke down. There he is, in the middle of the night, coming to get me. So it's those kinds of experiences that you'd say. Well, a lot of people said I'm not going to be bothered, but he did. So I really applaud him for that. He would do things for me, and I would help him whenever he needed assistance.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. So I'm the next question I want to ask you, I'm sure you can come up with a number of examples, and I just want to challenge you to come up with one. And but what is an example of a situation where you personally got to make a really substantial impact, Mick, and maybe even in the moment, it might have surprised you a little bit, and yet you also know that would have never been possible if not for the relationship that you two had. What's an example of something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of people that come to mind. So anybody who teaches will tell you this. So I have my examples also where somewhere over the course of the years, you just don't know where the seed is going, right? So you
Yeah.
plant a seed and then sometimes you hear back and sometimes you don't hear. You have no idea what impact you had. So I've had several really close relationships with students who have come back years later and started to say, this was a big influence. So I'll give you one. So when I was a young professor, one of my earliest positions, I met a young man who was 18 years old, very mature individual. And in some ways, he just didn't really fit because he was so unusual. and he came from a corporate family, but a family business. So he had really been a leader in many ways since he was a child. So even though he was 18, it was more as though he had the maturity of maybe a 35-year-old. So it's really strange. And he would tell me that people don't really respond all that well when they see an 18-year-old telling older people what to do. Now, long story short, this was an individual at a medical university, and I was teaching all the liberal arts. I got to know him. Well, that individual went on not only to get his MD, but also then he's a CEO of one of the leading cancer clinics in the United States of America. So I said, I'm really blessed that here's a person that I just met at 18, but then also had a very close relationship and kept him, I say I kept out of his way, is how I put it, because this is a person that I was in a position to be able to assist, to advise, to recommend. And then he went on to, again, what I would say earlier, make the world a better place, because he's a tremendous individual and a leading CEO and MD right until the present.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. What a great example. Well, I'll tell you, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation today and just share from your heart and stuff. And my goal for this podcast is, it's been twofold, and it's remained constant the whole time since we've launched this podcast. Is I want to give, you, the guest, the opportunity to come on and just honor a relationship, or more than one, if it makes sense, to for somebody that's had such a profound impact on your life, on your business, and for our listeners who they too are entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs. I just want to use these stories to inspire them to place an intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own lives. And Mick, with your help, we certainly accomplished that today. I want to thank you so much. For anybody that's listening to this, maybe they're going, "Man, Kev, I really like Mick. I like who he is. I like how he shows up." And maybe they're even thinking, "You know what? I've got a book that I'd like to write." And maybe Mick might be able to help me out with that. How can folks get a hold of you? Any resources, anything we can share with folks with the show notes?
Yeah, I think one of the primary areas that on LinkedIn. So I'm Mick, the Doctor of Digital Smith, PhD on LinkedIn. And I
Okay.
think a lot of my background is there. It tells you how I work with people. It tells you about the podcast that I've had for quite a long time. I know the power of podcasting. And I think you can listen to me because I also co-host several other podcasts as well, including my own, the Doctor of Digital podcast, which has been around for about 13 years or so. So I think
Wow.
there's ways of getting a hold of me. And I say, if you can't find me, you're not looking, because I'm pretty easy to find. I also write on Substack as well, too. So I have a number of articles that come out pretty consistently, too.
Okay. Very good. Any last thing that you feel led to share, Mick, before we call it a wrap?
Well, I think it's partly the relationship angle is something that I've always carried into business and throughout my career. It's very how important relationships are. And I just have to say, I just was fortunate. I was born into a really incredible family. The combination of my mother and father always had a couple things that I saw and I picked up. My dad was very disciplined, very mature, always kept his nose to the grindstone. He knew exactly what he had to do. This is back in the day where it was a one income family. My dad was a factory worker, and I saw how hard he worked. So I said, okay, I'm going to have the work ethic. And then my mom, who was also an incredible human being, she has the most emotional intelligence that I've seen of anybody that I've ever come across. So that combination of the kind of the hard work, the discipline, but also the emotional intelligence is something that I've been able to pick up on and use. So I just was fortunate, just lucky that I was in the family that I was. And I've also carried that out through, I think, my career and in personal relationships as well, and developed them over the years as I met people in positions of business or in colleges and universities. So I'm always a collaborative type of individual.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'll tell you, this has been a really great experience, and I want to thank you again for taking the time to have this conversation today, Mick. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you, and I'm excited to share this with a lot of folks. So, thanks so much, Mick.
Well, thank you so much. It was like somebody talking in my family. You're a great guy, Kevin. Good to see you again, my friend.
Well, thanks so much.